Thank you so much, Lindy. And welcome to Win TV, Attorney Blayton. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Fine. Thank you for inviting me.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I'm going to start off with a question which I couldn't even understand why I was asking this question, and that is, are you an expert in police reform? But I think you have a very interesting response to that.
Well, given that this country has never seen any real or significant police reform, I don't believe anyone can claim to be an expert in it. It would be like claiming to be an expert in unicorns, which don't exist.
But the fact that we have gotten, well, why would you say that? Because, I mean, it seems as though every time there's a new chief of police in any area across the country, they're always looking at ways in which, and budgets sort of dictate that as well, I would think, how a police unit will operate. And so maybe it's an internal reform process as opposed to one that's external. But police departments are constantly in transition. Would you agree?
It depends on what you mean by reform. I mean, you can tweak something and change something here and there. You can rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic as it sinks. That's not reforming the Titanic situation. So a lot of what these people are saying that they're doing to, quote, reform the police is really just sort of moving things around, shuffling things around, rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. In order to have some real and significant police reform, we have to get at the root of the issue. American policing was based upon slave patrols, people catching runaway slaves or trying to punish runaway slaves. That is the actual existential root of American policing. It began with the Spanish in Cuba. It transformed over Barbados. Barbados is very directly connected to U.S. policing. And when Britain decided to end slavery in the 1830s, a lot of Bayesian white planters moved to South Carolina and brought their slaves with them. And that was one of the first states to implement a type of police force, because it was basically a control mechanism to keep slaves from running away or revolting or stuff like that. So over the years, American policing has been upon that foundation. So the entire structure needs to be changed and reformed itself. You can't tweak, say we're going to give somebody 2 hours of implicit bias training or introduce them to the community and they'll do better. We have a system that is very much infected with hate. It's a hate-filled system in many instances. And we have to address that. It's based quite a bit on white supremacy, not totally, but a lot of it. And its very structure is based upon the idea of white supremacy.
So how complicit would people be who, let's say back in the day, especially here in the District of Columbia, when we had no Black members, Black officers on the police force, and local activists really fought hard to get more Blacks in the upper ranks of the police force. And we celebrated, cities across the country celebrating, the first Black police chief, or as Congressman Val Demings, the first Black female police chief. Does that make residents or Americans complicit, Black Americans complicit in perpetuating a system that you described?
As I mentioned in the commentary that I wrote last week, and I believe the Informer has published that, we have to participate in public safety within a particular context. The context in which it is based now has a great deal to do with white supremacy. There have been a lot of very fine Black police officers, a lot of very fine white police officers, but the structure itself can tend to warp an individual's perspective. I had mentioned in my commentary about the young police officer, Alex King. He had only been on the force full-time for 3 days and only been on the street for 2 days when he was involved in the George Floyd murder. Now, here's somebody who claims that he joined the police force in Minneapolis to help improve it, to help protect people who were being abused by an abusive police department. Yet he winds up being complicit in one of the most horrendous murders shot on video and seen around the world. It sparked a movement. So I think that this young man's intent was right, but the system was such that it warped him. It allowed him to participate in this thing. You know, how willing he was is hard to say, you know, but people are going to have to consider, how do you, you know, participate in this process in contact. There have been many very fine Black police officers, but there have been Black police officers who've not been that great. I've seen Black police officers crack heads, you know, with nightsticks for seemingly no reason, you know.
Right.
So just because a person is Black doesn't mean that they're filled with righteousness and good thinking. So we have to say the system is bad, you know, and we have to protect people from those who would do harmful things, you know, and are empowered by the state to do so. So yes, I'm not saying that we should not have Black police officers, but I am saying that they have to understand what they're doing. I put it in terms of my own personal experience. I went to Vietnam. I was a Marine Corps officer. I was a combat pilot. Vietnam was a war for white supremacy. Okay, I own up to that. I participated in helping to kill people of color, you know, for a global agenda of white supremacy. So acknowledging that, then what do you do to try to make sure it doesn't happen again, to correct or fix those problems? And Black police officers, any police officer of color or any white police officer has to understand that what they do has consequences. They have to own up to what they do. They have to understand what it is they're trying to do, and they have to stick to an agenda that will promote the welfare of people rather than wind up murdering them on the street.
So let me ask you, because in this effort, let's go back a little bit to address some issues of what people might consider police reform. Are the body cameras? What's your take on body cameras? Does that do anything to address the abusive tactics of police officers?
Body cams can be helpful, but how many instances have you heard of where the body cams were not on, were not working, have been left behind? Until we can figure out a system that more rigorously enforces, you know, the use of body cams, I think, you know, they're going to be helpful to some degree, but only to the degree that they're not abused. I think that officers should be disciplined if for some reason their body cam goes out and they don't report it immediately, then they should be disciplined. Because a lot of times, it's my belief that a lot of these officers are turning their body cams off so that they can do things that they do not want their superiors to see. So it's a step forward, it's inching forward, but it's still very slow, and it's based on a foundation of white supremacy that has to be dealt with.
So do you have recommendations or of what cities or departments need to be doing in this whole area of police reform? Is police reform an achievable goal? Can we reform a system, you know, that has really a notorious history? Can it be reformed?
It's an existential issue. It depends on what you consider to be policing. I mean, the idea goes back beyond the 9th century posse comitatus, you know, which was basically the sheriff could round up men to go chase somebody down who was a bad actor, stole a cow or killed a pig or something. So it's foundational. The problem is foundational. I think it can be changed, but it cannot be changed by tweaking here and there. You cannot cut down a tree by, you know, clipping off a branch here and there. You have to work at the trunk. You have to work at the root. One of the things that I would say is that we do not need an armed response when somebody is having a mental or emotional breakdown of sorts. I mean, you do not need it every time. I think that cities, counties should empower people that are social workers that are trained to work with people who are having crisis to go out there. Now, perhaps an armed policeman might escort them, but the person who is unarmed and trained to handle the situation would be in charge, and that person would be the person to authorize that police person to use force on the scene. It would not be up to the police officer who is trained. Do you know in many states, you can become a police officer with less training than it takes to become a licensed cosmetologist? I mean, you can be given a gun and allowed to go out and shoot someone in the street with less training than it takes for you to do somebody's hair.
That's amazing. That's amazing. That I did not know, but I know that a lot of, particularly in the district where there's an effort to recruit more local residents and to increase the recruitment of police officers. I don't know if the training lasts more than in a couple of months, but I mean, when you talk about police reform, is that something you're saying as well, that the training needs to be longer? It needs to include more mental health, classes. I mean, what is it that you think would be the magic, pardon the pun, the magic bullet?
Well, there is no magic bullet. I taught for a short while at a police academy in Hampton, Virginia. I taught Fourth Amendment issues, basically telling policemen what they should not do in terms of violating persons' Fourth Amendment rights with regards to stopping, searching, stuff like that. I think that most police training focuses on this idea of round up the bad guys and type of thing, where it's almost like military training. So I don't think training in the current context is the answer. It has to be completely revamped, the training does. And the mission of the police department has to be revamped. So when you revamp the mission, then you revamp the training, because if you train someone not to pull your gun at first sight, but to get someone competent to handle a situation on the scene, then the training is very different.
Mm. And so, lastly, Attorney Blayton, so, there's the Black Lives Matter movement, so many others, NAACP, a lot of national organizations are asking for police reform. And even in your state of Virginia, where you are, I know that you've been involved. What do you think that I guess the movement should be, as opposed to defunding police? Or, I mean, are they barking up the wrong tree? Or what's your opinion on what the movement should be asking for?
My understanding from talking to many people who are involved in the movement is that people are not saying we do not need a police department. They are saying take money that you're giving to police to buy tanks and these weapons of war and put them into hiring competent social workers, counselors, and people that can help people. The idea is to protect and serve, not to punish and kill. So defunding the police means taking those monies, those billions of dollars we're spending for all these crazy warlike weapons, and putting them into human services and putting them into people that can help people that need help. And not the primary goal to be the, in Finland, only policemen in Finland in 2013 only fired 7 bullets. I think it was 7 bullets the entire year. An entire year, their police department, the whole country, fired, not talking about killing people, just fired weapons, 7 bullets in the whole country. So it's not that it cannot be done. People can be, made to rethink about these things, because it's not a military action. And I know that one of the reasons why policemen are so quick to shoot people is because of the crazy gun laws we have. You can walk into a store and buy an automatic weapon, walk out in a short amount of time. So yes, policemen are afraid that somebody may have a gun because our laws allow everybody to have a gun. If we change that and prevent people from having so many guns, then the policemen won't be in such fear of their lives when they approach a car for a broken taillight.
Yeah, I'm sorry we got to go, but I totally agree with you. Not that you asked my opinion, but I would say in the District of Columbia, where we have some of the strongest gun laws in the country, but we also have a city that's full of guns, and a lot of those guns are owned illegally, and so that brings up another conversation about just the gun laws, as you said, in particular, and the argument, what I just raised being the argument that the other side uses sometimes against gun laws. But there needs to be some effort to control the number of guns that are on our streets, and where they're coming from, I think leads to a very, very interesting conversation. Mr. Attorney Blayton, I want to thank you so much for being with us today. And, you know, we will definitely have you back, continue to write, and we continue to look forward to having your voice in the Washington Informer.
Okay, thank you very much.
All righty. All righty. Have a great day.